So we get to enjoy very much a different flavor of church history than we have been dealing with up until this point. This marks a very different tone for what we're going to be seeing moving forward. And in this tone, particularly this week and next week, is we're going to be able to relate with it a lot today. And so we're going to be able to take a lot more practical things from what we learn about this week and next week and apply it to today. Thank you. And so this week, the topic is entitled A Whole New World. And so if you can say that without having a certain song stuck in your head, I would be very impressed, but I wasn't able to, so. And then next week we're going to be talking about the Enlightenment. And so these two events, kind of like what I was saying before, they mark significant turning points for how we look at church, how we look at our world in general. Because up until this point, the Catholic Church has been this one striving entity that has not been challenged by most of anybody. And then over the past couple months, we've been talking about how there have been these challenges, right? These people who have been protesting the Catholic Church, and they become what we know as today Protestants. And ever since that moment of protest, it kind of just it just spider webs, and it keeps on expanding, it keeps on changing and molding, and we get to a point where it's like, well, what is the Catholic Church? What is the Catholic Universal Church? And so it's an interesting question to ask. This morning we're going to be talking about how Christianity made its impact on North America. And so it's a very it's a very interesting thing to have happen, because it means more than just a faith coming to North America. It means more than just discovering North America or bringing your religion to North America, because it also includes changing your way of life in North America. So we are going to talk about that. But first, there's a couple of preliminary things to get our minds revolving around that. I'm just going to talk very briefly of this thing called the Peace of Augsburg in 1555. I'm not going to talk very much actually at all about it. All I'm going to say is the outcome of this was that there was more say for each country's leader to say which religion is what for each country. So England had the Anglicans, Germany had the Lutherans, Sweden had the Dutch Reformed, France had the Calvinists, yeah, so based off of the country you're in, very much determined the religion that you followed. And so we look at that today, and we think, well, that's very odd. Simply because if we were to go down the street, on Main Street, we would find what? You'd find a Catholic church, and then if you walked outside the Catholic church, what did you say? The Cove, that's right, yeah, yeah. Oh, right. The Cove as well, right. If you walked outside the Catholic Church door and you took a right and you had a stone in your hand and you threw it as hard as you could probably hit the Seine River Church, which is just down the street. And so it's very interesting that this very traditional church is right down the street from this very charismatic church. Whereas in Europe, that's not really a thing. It's like, oh, I live in France. So that means I'm either Catholic or Calvinist. And the Catholics and Calvinists, they didn't really like each other very much. But the Seine River and the Catholic Church, well, yeah, they like each other more, probably than the Catholics and the Calvinists did. I'll just put it this way, they're not trying to kill each other. Peace of Augsburg, okay. I would say the last straw that broke the camel's back that caused people to really begin to question the validity of religion was what was called the 30-Year War. And so in 1618 to 1648, a war went on between countries like Austria, Sweden, France, Germany, Spain, Denmark, and the war started as a religious war. There were struggles between each country as they were trying to figure out which religion would be the most important to follow. This is a very simplistic summary of it, but we're not going to get into it. And so there's a quote from a book that I'm reading right now, and it says, this conflict, the 30-Year War, primarily began as a religious struggle with political overtones, but it ended as a barbarous political power struggle with religious overtones. So it began as a religious war and ended as a political war. That can be seen very clearly by the fact that certain countries would go at war with other countries based off of their religion. And then it shifted when, so 1635, kind of in the midway point of the war, Catholic French allies would Catholic France would align themselves with Protestant Netherlands to destroy Protestant Spain. So instead of it becoming just one country's religion against another country's religion, it soon became more of a territorial thing. This brought on about 4.5 to 8 million soldiers who died, not including civilians who, if you were caught in the crossfire, which was basically any town in one of these countries, basically what would happen is the soldiers would come in and they would wipe out everybody in the town. And it would be like this pillaging escapade, and then they would kill everybody and wipe out their villages. In the name of their religion, which was Christian. They would pillage other countries, towns, because of their religion, which was also Christian, allegedly. At the end of the war, nothing really came about it in a positive way. And the result was a religious indifference of the empire, meaning that people were starting to realize that religion, the church, it wasn't doing the thing that it was supposed to be doing. And people were tired of it. People were so tired of it that they realized, okay, there has to be something else going on here. Because if the Christians keep killing each other, then maybe Christianity, the way we're doing it, is either not right, or maybe Christianity itself is not right. And so this week and next week, we're going to be talking about those outcomes. One outcome is this idea that the way we're doing Christianity is not right. And next week, we're going to be asking the question, what if Christianity isn't right? Because that's what people were asking. And that's what people are asking today. But it is argued that generally, up until that point of time, people weren't really asking those questions. People weren't asking, is Christianity right? Because they didn't have any other choice. So at this point in time, something very significant is happening in the world. People are realizing that the world is a lot bigger than they thought it was. And so we learn about people like Christopher Columbus, who sailed the ocean blue, and depending on the textbook you read, will determine whether or not he was a nice guy. History will say that, I guess it really depends on the history book that you read. Christopher Columbus basically took a whole bunch of people and they discovered the New World, which is what we would see as North America. And he wasn't the only one, but there was a lot of other people that came and they discovered North America and different parts of North America. And they basically took it over. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be doing a talk called Slaves and Witches, which will be covering slaves and witches. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And it's a weird thing to have a history lesson on slaves and witches, but I think it's actually very important because kind of like the Inquisition, when we're studying church history, we need to study the parts that make us feel very uncomfortable that our ancestors came from, so that we can learn from it. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be focusing on basically how there was this thing called the 13 colonies that got developed between 1607 and 1732. And so if you look at your notes, you'll see that they were divided into three sections. It was New England, the New England colonies, which was New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. So this is all now in America. And it's all on the western coast of America. There's the middle colonies, which is New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. And then there is the southern colonies, which was Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and later Georgia. And the biggest thing that they wanted to do was the biggest distinctive, I guess, when they discovered all of these colonies, was the fact that it wasn't these colonies weren't founded to be exclusively one religion. So I didn't write them down, but I'm just going to go through them really quickly, and I'm going to tell you the faith-based that they started on. Okay? and it's quite diverse. So Virginia was the first place that got founded, and that was primarily Anglican. New Hampshire was originally Anglican, but it became Puritists. So if you guys remember from last week, Dustin did a really great job of explaining how the Anglicans formed, and then from that there was this Reformation movement called the Puritans that sought to change some of the rigid structure that the Anglicans were known for. Massachusetts also was Puritan. Maryland was Catholic. New Jersey was Dutch Reformed and Swedish Lutherans. New York was a bit of a hodgepodge of a bunch of different things. They were Dutch Reformed, but they were taken over by the English, and it became very diverse. So the Jewish people also were known to be there as well. And Pennsylvania, it was founded. A lot of the colonies were founded like this, but this one was kind of their pride and joy with being known for being the religious tolerant ones. So you could be whatever religion you wanted, and you could be there. So you could go to a town, and on Main Street you could find like 4 different churches. And this was like, nobody would have done this in Europe, because there would have been wars that would have started from this. But all of a sudden, when these colonies started, it started on this understanding that we don't want the 30-year war to happen again. We don't want things like what the Catholics did to happen again. And so instead of trying to restructure things so that our faith becomes less divisive, we're going to kind of like throw everything out and come in saying, you can believe whatever you want. And so not all the colonies were like this, but some of them were. Pennsylvania was a very significant one. We're going to come back to that one in a second. Connecticut was the Puritans. Rhode Island, they also had the religious freedom. Delaware was Swedish Lutherans, the Quakers, Anglicans. North Carolina was the Anglicans and Quakers. South Carolina was the Anglican Church and the French Calvinists. And Georgia was established by Anglicans, but it also had a lot of diversity. So as you can see, just from me reading those out, it seems to be that they did not want this exclusive religion in their new founding colonies. What are your thoughts on that? If you're starting a new country, and you just came from Europe, where we've spent months talking about Europe, and they're not always doing great, but now you wanted to start over, start fresh. And so let's do religious diversity completely. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's easy when we hear that sort of thing, like religious tolerance or religious diversity. You can believe whatever you want, because we don't think that. But what they're saying is not you can believe whatever you want, but that the government doesn't get involved. And if I'm sure they believed very strongly in that, what they believed was, let's say, whatever, the Anglicans believed very strongly what they believed, and the Dutch Reformed believed what they believed, etc. But the only difference was they wouldn't go kill the other guys. So they didn't believe in like a plurality, they just believed in not enforcing their whatever denomination with violence.
Any other thoughts?
How do you control the masses?
Oh, that's so interesting. How would you control the masses? Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Jesse pointed out something that should just be clarified here. This is where denominations came from. Okay? But there's a difference between denominations and sects. So sectarians, this idea would be that it is completely separate from Christianity. So that, let's say, they wouldn't be considered Christians. Denominations are different, and it's very much like how we are today, right? We would consider the Seine River Church to be another Christian church. You don't have the mic, so you gotta get that. But we do. We would consider the Seine River Church to be another Christian church. We would consider the other churches in the EMC conference to be other Christian churches. Okay? Now, that is a denominational distinction that came when people started coming into the New World. Okay? And it worked really well in America. You know where it didn't work well? You bet it didn't. It was like, it did not go well in Europe. Because just like Dustin was saying, how do you control the masses when within your country there's different belief systems that can determine how you control how people live their lives? But in a new world, you can believe what you want within the confines of the Christian doctrine. Even though, like, okay, you're Anglican and you're a Calvinist, and it's like, okay, you have some differences, but like we can have a church next to each other. And sometimes it worked well, sometimes it didn't. And that's the thing about denominations, even when we look at it today. Generally, denominational distinctions work well, but not always. And it is it's a murky thing to try to sometimes make the distinction between a denomination and a sect. Does that make sense? Anybody have any other questions, any thoughts? Oh, yeah. So I might be wrong in this, so somebody might have to correct me. I am trying to remember where the Mormons came from. Does anybody know? Well, yeah, okay, sorry, the country, or the state. Utah, okay, so, okay. That's not a good example. I'm trying to, okay, so, you know what, let's say New York. So New York, the Jewish people would be a sect from, let's say the Anglicans, who would be very much, they would be a Christian. Jewish people the Jewish people wouldn't even consider themselves Christians because they're not, right? So, yeah, that's a good question. Okay. One of the other things that people in the New World really didn't like was how they were ruled in Europe. How were they ruled in Europe? Who ruled them? Monarchs, a king. And if we're going to start a new world, start over again with religious freedom and liberty, I think we got to address the elephant in the room about our king. And so William Penn, he is the one who founded Pennsylvania. That was a big place for religious freedom. And for Mr. Penn, he was very much convinced that if we are going to live in a country with religious freedom, that we can no longer be under a monarch. Because if you are under a monarch, you have to submit to that monarch. And we can't really do much. We can't vote them in. There's no, I don't want to say the word because it'll give it away. There's no, what's another word for it? There's no collective thing that gives everyone the voice to say if they agree with something or not. And that word is called democracy. Right, good job. I kind of spelled it out for you on a board. And you know why there's no democracy? Because that had never happened. People were ruled over by kings, by queens. That's just how it was going, and by the Pope. And so all of a sudden, they're in this new world, totally new framework going on here. And where's the king? It's like, well, he's pretty far away. And if we're going to be a place for religious freedom, I think we need to actually put that into practice. So Pennsylvania, it is Philadelphia's. It was the place where the Declaration of Independence was signed. And basically what they were trying to do is they were trying to create a country under freedom. And so if you are from the States, or if you have been to the States, or if you have turned on the news in the past couple months, you'll probably hear freedom a lot, because that is what America prides itself on. And it comes from this idea of we do not want to be a part of the monarchy anymore. That's right. We the people, right? Whereas before, it was you the monarch, yeah. What do you want me to believe, right? But now it's no, we get to believe. And so from that, and in a couple of weeks, we're going to talk about it a little bit more. And Dustin alluded to it last week with the Puritans. From that, we have this thing called the Great Awakening. And out of the Great Awakening was this highly, highly impactful teaching that it is you as the individual that has to make that confession of faith. It is not about where you live that determines what you believe. It is about you as an individual making a confession of faith that Jesus would come into your life, which is all things that have influenced us today and the language that we use today. And it came from this. It came from this idea of being more independent. And so for England, they gave America their blessing. They're like, if you want to be independent, that's great. We will never harm you again, and we will give you peace. That's not true. That's not at all what happened. So the English Revolution is something that resulted in this. The outcome was America. They wanted to become completely independent of Europe. Do you think that was a good idea? Do you think it was a good idea to become completely independent and to become a democracy?
I'll say yes.
No, yes. Yes. Power to the people. Does anybody want to play the devil's advocate a little bit and say no? Okay.
Well, I can talk.
Oh, okay. All right. we believe you, Randy.
I think in that context, there's some good, but it also, people are very undisciplined as a species, so it allows for a lot of watering down.
Okay.
It expands structure to the point where just about everything is doable. And now we're seeing nowadays where the removal of God allows the lack of morals to even go further. If they can remove God, just about everything is open.
Uh,
That comes from maybe not having enough structure, which democracy kind of enjoys.
An interesting thing, kind of along the lines of what you said, Randy. So the founding fathers of America, I kind of alluded to this idea that Christians, people came into America and founded colonies based off of Christian values. The founding fathers were deists, primarily. And deists, in a very brief way, and we'll get to it actually next week when we talk about the Enlightenment, deists were basically, they believed in God, but they believed that God created everything, and then he kind of took a step back, and he has no influence on anything. He let everyone kind of do their own thing. It's a saying, watchmaker God, something like that. Do you remember this? Yeah. So basically, this idea that God wound up the watch, put it on a table, walked away, and let us fend for ourselves. So, yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting thing.
So just to go further on that, I'm not a communist. I'm going to say that I'm very much for democracy, but democracy only works with an awful lot of discipline.
Yeah. I love how you started that. I'm not a communist. This is, but it's true though, right? Yeah. It's true. Like the idea of democracy is a great principle because it gives us all voice. It's almost like, oh yeah, okay, don't get in trouble. It's almost like there needs to be like a controlled democracy. There we go. That's my 2 cents, and we won't go too much further into that. But I mean, in a sense, it is true. But what I would just like maybe say in response to that, democracy is a great idea. A monarch rule is also a great idea. The problem is that the people who are in power are human, just like us, who are deeply sinful and are in need of Jesus. And no matter what political or government structure that we have, it will always be flawed. And guys, what have we been doing for the past number of months? It's like we've been showing you how that's true with the monarchy specifically, and this idea of theophany, which is that the church runs the government. We've been showing you how this doesn't work. And for the next few months, or the next, couple months, as we end off our series, we will also show you how democracy doesn't work. This is the reality of where we are at, you guys. It's not about finding the right political structure for us to follow, because it will always fall short. Before we end, I need to make one correction that something I said last week. The question was asked, what was the first English Bible? To which I confidently said the King James Version. I was wrong. So this week I was like, I don't know if I was right about that. So I wanted to look it up. So although the King James Bible was the first most widely dispersed Bible in the English language, it was not the first English one that was completely translated. The guy's name was Miles Coverdale. So that was in 1535. He was the one who completed the first printed Bible, okay? And then, so that's just a little fun fact for you. I just wanted to make sure I corrected myself on that. So, does anybody have any other questions at all? Or thoughts before we end? Okay, correction for my consideration. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the Wycliffe Bible was the first English translation of the Bible from the Latin Vulgate. You're right. So that's true. So Miles Coverdale, to what I'm understanding, it was the first completed Bible that was used from the original language. Yeah. So Tyndale, he translated a significant amount of the Bible before Coverdale. He translated a significant amount of the Bible from the Greek and Hebrew and Latin, which were the original languages. He wasn't able to translate them all because he was killed, because that happened. But Miles Coverdale was the one who kind of helped finish that from the language. So, yeah. Thank you for that. Anybody else have another correction to consider? Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay. Utah, New York, okay. Yeah, so Mormons from New York, yep. And I think, it is interesting how many somewhat newer religions have formed from people coming into the New World. And how, even though there was some persecution that they experienced, they certainly experienced much less than in parts of Europe, because they had the religious freedom to do that. And so, I think it is something for us just to think about for a second. Like, as much as religious freedom, when the New World came, seems to be a good thing, it did spawn a lot of different religions to come forward that are not just like they're differences in minor points of theology, which makes them different denominations, which is generally fine. But for some cases, they are completely different, and they are not Christians at all. And I think it's important for us to recognize that it's actually bad when that happens. And I think we need to just take note of that these new religions that are forming, like religious freedom doesn't actually always mean a good thing. So, but, democracy, right? So, yeah.
I guess with the idea of the religious freedom and what it leads to, and all of the Mormons, they would have been dealt with swiftly in Europe, right? But I guess it comes down to, it comes down to, do we believe that the truth has, in a uncontrolled environment, does the truth spread, or does a lie spread more rapidly? And I'm not quite sure. It's maybe a very modern idea that, if everything's fair, the truth will win out. That's reality. That will work. The lies will fall away. And but who knows? Maybe not. We live in a broken world, it's hard to measure it. But we see all of the ways. Let's say if we just take America, where all the ways it's gone sideways with all these heretical offshoots and the corruption of the church with hyper kind of nationalism and stuff. But there's also been such immense good where, the power of the American church in the good, it's easy to point out all of the ways it's kind of misstepped, but in the eternal scales, maybe the freedom has led to more good than evil, but it's impossible to quantify it this side of heaven, I guess.
Yeah, and again, our motives in this series, I don't know if I've always been great at expressing that, is like it happened, right? So whether or not I would have done things differently if I was in their shoes, the reality is I probably wouldn't have, because there's a lot of influence and things that I can't consider that these people would have had. But it happened, and we need to learn from it now. So, yeah.
I'm just curious about our Canadian history. Will we be mostly kind of viewing ourselves as coming from American history, or will we be looking at this from a Canadian perspective?
Right. So I was trying to look at some Canadian history, and it's very complicated. What I was seeing was, a short answer would be we have been heavily influenced by the way that the American colonies have formed, and also by the French and English people coming over. So we started off very Catholic, but from my understanding, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but from my understanding, the impact of the colonies kind of came up and it just started mixing things around. So, yeah. Okay. I'm going to pray. Thanks so much for listening, guys, and we'll come back next week. Thank you, Lord, for your goodness and your grace, and we thank you, God, for your history. We thank you, God, that we can look back on your history and we can recognize that, Lord, you have been there, and that we do not serve a God who is distant and far off, but a God who is interacting with the broken. What a blessing and what an incredible thing that is. So God, I pray you would guide us this week and encourage us. Amen. Have a great week, guys.